I'm Jeff Asher, and this is the Jeff-alytics podcast. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest who will give a unique inside look at how the crime data sausage is made. Tim Ferguson is Assistant Director at the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division, or CJIS, which runs the FBI's Uniform Crime Report. Tim walks through his unlikely path from a small farming town to senior leadership inside the FBI, shaped by years working violent crime and narcotics investigations before moving into national crime and policing data oversight. Our conversation focuses on what CJIS actually does for both law enforcement across the country and the public at large to make crime data a reality. Tim explains why the FBI's recent move to monthly crime data reporting matters, how it changes the way trends are understood, and what it takes to balance speed, accuracy, and transparency at a national scale. This episode pulls back the curtain on the infrastructure behind crime data, the people responsible for maintaining it, and why collaboration and constant improvement are essential if that data is going to meaningfully support public safety. My guest today is the Assistant Director of the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division, Tim Ferguson. Tim, thanks so much for joining.
Oh, thank you so much. I know that's a mouthful, but I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. So I ask all of my guests when we're starting up, what is your background? How did you get to be here and to have so much responsibility?
Well, that's a great question. I'd start out by saying, I never imagined at any given time that I would be in the position that I'm in right now. I'm a kid from a small town in rural Illinois and grew up in a farming town. I had 400 people in my town and I had 29 kids in my graduating class. I ended up going to college in Tennessee and got a degree in English, and I thought I wanted to go to law school, and then my kind of career path went on a different trajectory, and I ended up being an active duty military officer until 2002, where I started working in the Jefferson County Police Department for a short period of time in Kentucky before being hired by the FBI. When I came into the FBI, I pretty much have worked violent crime, narcotics, gang investigations. And I did that for several years in the Southwest Ohio area in the Dayton office. And then for about 3 years, I was the supervisor of the Dayton office, and I ran all the criminal programs there, as well as being our coordinator for our civil rights program for the entire division, which covered all of Southern Ohio. At that point in time, my career went on a different trajectory and into the leadership route. I kind of always thought that I would be a gang investigator, and I got my master's degree in behavioral science. And I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to be a profiler. And I know many people have watched Criminal Minds, and I thought that's what I want to do. I want to be one of those profilers. But, of course, like I said, life takes you different directions. And I ended up going to Washington, D.C. to headquarters for a period of time in the Criminal Investigative Division, out to Springfield, Illinois as the Assistant Special Agent in charge of that division. I work in all criminal program matters, as well as the crisis response program and security programs. And then I went down to kind of an interesting trajectory on my career path, because as I mentioned, I have a degree in English and then I have a master's in behavioral science. And at that point in time, there was an opening in the operational technology division at Quantico, Virginia. My boss at the time says, hey, why don't you just go down there and try it out and see if you like it? And I told him, I said, boss, I appreciate the opportunity, but it's a promotion. And I said, but I don't know that I'm the guy for that. I'm not sure that that's the job for me. He said, well, just go down and check it out and see if you like it. So I went to Quantico, did a temporary duty assignment there for 60 days. And the boss at the time, the person who was running that division, the AD at the time, sat me down and he said, what do you think? And I said, well, I love the job and I love learning new things, and I'm just not sure that I'm the guy for you. And he said, look, I'm really looking for people that are leaders. I've got the folks that can turn wrenches. And he said, I know that you're not an engineer, you're not a, electronics engineer or a scientist, but, I really need people who can lead and who can help translate that operational piece of what we do from to the engineers and the scientists, and then vice versa from the scientists, and take technology and operationalize it and explain it to people outside the division, explain it to people up the chain of command, and then really apply that technology to the work that we do as FBI agents. And so I ended up applying for the job and going to Quantico, Virginia. And I spent a couple of years there working in both digital forensics as well as the field operations, where we were working things like the radio program, our tracking program, our training programs for all of our electronics technicians and our technically trained agents. Really enjoyed it. And as life happens in the FBI, when you're really enjoying something and you feel like you're getting in your groove and you really understand everything about what you're doing, then the time comes where you get a tap on the shoulder and it says, hey, I really want you to think about, West Virginia. And at the time, I remember a friend of mine called me and said, hey, I hear your name floating around for the CJIS division in West Virginia. And I just laughed and I said, I'm not going to West Virginia and I'm not going to CJIS. And of course, here I am at CJIS, right? It's the way it always goes. having been in the military, I should have known better than to say I'm not going to do something, because that's what always happens. And the interesting thing about CJIS is I got here and I had been in the Bureau for 20 years and I thought I knew what CJIS was about. And then I realized I really had no idea what CJIS was about. And so that kind of was the trajectory of what got me here. I came in as the Deputy Assistant Director and then ultimately the Assistant Director running this division. And so, I tell people all the time that I've taken advantage of the opportunities that the Bureau has given me to accept new challenges and really to step outside of my comfort zone. And that's really what I did in the Operational Technology Division and here, where we are so technically driven and so operationally focused and so process heavy that I wasn't really used to that. Like I said, I understand drug dealers and gangbangers and violent criminals, and I know how to go out and arrest those guys and make good cases and write wiretaps and things like that. So coming to the business side of the FBI was really, not only was it life-changing for me, but it was also invigorating for my career, because I love the FBI. I've been in for almost 24 years now as an FBI agent, and I love it. I wouldn't want to do anything else in the world, but this just kind of reinvigorated my career to see another side of the FBI, something that I wasn't familiar with in the past, and learn something new. And you really, it's funny because I tell people all the time that you learn to keep your mouth shut when you walk into a room, because you're not the smartest guy in there. And then so I know I'm not the smartest guy in the room when I walk in, and I learn a lot from my folks because we have really super sharp folks here at the CJIS division. They're very operationally focused, very, very much care about customer service and taking care of people and serving our customers. So I'm just really lucky to be here. And I don't know if you tell it or not, but I'm very passionate about what I do here at CJIS, because I think that this is great work that we do here. And so that was kind of the trajectory that got me where I'm today.
So now I'm going to challenge you, because, I'm sure you could talk about this for hours, and I know that you guys do a lot. So, but what is CJIS and what does it do? Because I'm very familiar with the FBI's crime data and collection systems, and I imagine the organization is just huge in comparison. So, what are you in charge of?
Wow, another great question. So, first of all, the CJIS division is the largest division in the FBI. We have almost 3,000 government employees and several hundred contractors that work here on our campus in West Virginia. In addition to that, we also service 14 other divisions, representatives from 14 other divisions that sit here on our campus. And we're we're a self-sustaining campus. And when I was at the Operational Technology Division at Quantico, where we sat on the Marine Corps base Quantico, or you think about Huntsville, and the new facility that we have down there that sits on the Redstone Arsenal, the Army base down there, we really are a self-sufficient campus. And so we have, the FBI police here that patrol our area and that take care of our security. And we have, power generation here. This campus can generate enough power to fuel 4,400 homes a day, just because of the fact that we have to have multiple redundancies in the work that we do. But when we talk about the work of the CJIS division, what I would say is I'd probably bucket it in looking at who our customer base is. And there's two different buckets for our customer bases. The first is our law enforcement partners. That's really kind of the reason why CJIS was created, the Criminal Justice Information Services Division, to service our law enforcement partners. We have products and services that we offer to our law enforcement agencies. As an example, I know you're familiar with the National Crime Information Computer, NCIC. So if you get pulled over by a police officer, and chances are likely, if they have your information, they're running you through NCIC. It is a database that contains about 22 different files, like the sex offender registry, stolen vehicles, wants and warrants for people that are wanted by law enforcement. But that database itself gets queried by law enforcement 10 million times, over 10 million times a day. So you can just imagine how useful that data is to law enforcement officers on the street to make sure that they go home safe. In addition to that, we offer law enforcement officers mobile biometrics capabilities. So if they have someone stopped on the side of the road, they can use a mobile biometrics device and fingerprint that individual and get an identification right there on the side of the road. You think about how far technology has come in the last 10 or 15 years, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But offering that little extra piece of assurance is that the person they're talking to is who they say they are could help an officer go home safe at night. We also offer multiple collaborative tools that law enforcement officers use, like the National Data Exchange, which has over 2 billion searchable offense reports. And so agencies contribute to this database, and officers and detectives can use it to connect the dots on cases that cross boundaries. As you can imagine, crime is global now, and there's no longer boundaries associated with criminal activity. And so the law enforcement officers will search the National Data Exchange. In addition to that, we also have the Next Generation Identification, Fingerprint, and Criminal History Repository. If you can remember, back in 1999, which I can remember because that wasn't that long ago to me. But in 1999, we had just file cabinets full of fingerprint cards, file cabinets in warehouses full of fingerprint cards. And that wasn't that long ago. And until we put everything into electronic versions of fingerprints. And so, we focus on fingerprints right now for the biometrics, but because that's where we have probably 80 some million criminal fingerprints in our repository and about 70 something million civil fingerprints in our repository. And that'll want to talk a little bit about our customer bases as the American public, what we do for that. So we have all of these fingerprints in there. We also have iris in there. Iris is kind of a new and emerging technology and a biometric that we use. I don't know if people are familiar, but iris biometric is just as identifiable as a fingerprint and just as unique as a fingerprint. So everyone's iris is different, and you can identify a person using their iris as well. So we're with our law enforcement partners, we're working on the different modalities of biometrics that they can use to identify someone on the side of the road. And then, of course, when we talk about our customer base, crime data really spans multiple different customer bases because, law enforcement officers use it for law enforcement agencies for data-driven decisions. But then people such as yourself use it for analytics. And, we have legislators that use it to help them craft legislation. Again, the American public just looks at it to say, what does crime look like in my neighborhood? So that kind of bridges both of those both of those buckets of the customer being law enforcement and the customer being in the American public. And the one more thing for the law enforcement customer, we receive over 5,500 calls and e-tips every single day here in this facility. So the CJIS division is the home for 1-800-CALL-FBI and tips.fbi.gov. So every tip from the American public comes into our central repository here and is handled by a professional who reviews, triages, and disseminates that tip to the appropriate law enforcement agency for action as deemed appropriate. But like I said, over 5,500. Now I can recall when I first got here almost three and a half years ago, it was 4,500 and now it's 5,500. So our volumes don't seem to be going down. They just continue to go up. Now, when we took a look at the customer base for the American public, that kind of helps also describe what it is that we do here. So the American public would want to go and purchase a firearm. So there's a firearm background check that gets done, that is completed. So our national instant criminal background check system here, so it sits in CJIS, conducts millions and millions of background checks a year on gun backgrounds. And I will say this, what I'm really excited about is for the last almost 4 years in a row, our immediate determination rate has been 92% or above. And what that means is that 92% of the time when a person is attempting to purchase a firearm is at the gun counter, that transaction is adjudicated within 11 minutes. And that just speaks volumes to the people that are here and making sure that we're servicing the customers and providing that service as quickly as possible. So 11 minutes or less, and 92% of the time that's adjudicated. And so phenomenal work by our NICS section and the work that they do there. And of course, the introduction of automation and emerging technologies really helped us become more efficient in the work that we do there. Again, with the American public, we talk about the tips that come in, we service them, and we take the tips and then we disseminate them to local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. And let me try to think of what else as far as the customers are concerned. Those are the major ones. And that I forgot about the civil background checks. Is a perfect example of work that we do for the public. When an individual is applying for a position of trust and they have to get a background check from the FBI, they'll submit their fingerprints and we conduct those background checks and we'll return them back to them so that they can use them to apply for those positions of trust. So all of those things we talk about domestically, but we also have a global reach. And we work with a lot of the visa waiver countries. It's a requirement to become a visa waiver country that you will share biometrics with the FBI in keeping the country safe and people that are transversing both of our countries. So with our preventing and combating serious crime agreements with these visa waiver countries, we set up the ability to share biometrics with our foreign counterparts under, of course, very strict sharing rules and regulations. So we have a very global reach in the work that we do here as well. We work very closely with our legal attachés that are sitting in the embassies across the globe to help us build those relationships with our foreign partners. So just a vast reach of the work that we do here in this division.
Do you have a cheat sheet that you bring with you every day that tells you what each acronym is, or have they just been drilled into your brain?
I think I talk about it so much because I get so excited about the work that we do here that it just kind of becomes second nature to me.
Yeah. You mentioned, I will give a shout out. I am such a big fan of that as a data source because it's one of the best repositories of just a couple days after the most recent month ends. You've got immediately data on background check requests by state, by type of firearm, and it's a fantastic data source. So I'll give a shout out if any of the listeners to this have not played with that. It's fun data to play around with. So I want to talk about crime data because this is all about crime data and trends and whatnot. And the biggest monumental change in the last year from a crime data perspective has been the FBI's switch to monthly reporting, which is just, it's such a tremendous source of almost basically raw data. Why did the FBI make that decision to go in that direction?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's really about transparency. I think I was struck with, you know how it's been in the past. I mean, you have to wait for sometimes 9, 10, 11 months to get the crime data from the year before. And at that point in time, that information, I think, kind of just becomes stagnant. And it's good to know, and it's important to know. And I think you can still make data-driven decisions based off of that. But, when you think about the challenges that we have in this division, one of the biggest challenges we have is the demand signal for information. And this is one of those areas where we say, can we get the information out faster so that it can be used by those who, either academia, legislators, folks like you, statisticians, law enforcement? Can we get it out quicker? And I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about our commitment to transparency and really our commitment to customer service and making sure that we are able to serve the American people. But I was struck with the fact that it was taking so long for us to get that information out. And I absolutely do not take credit for the monthly releases. It's the team here that the process was already kind of, it was in process to move to those monthly releases. I'm just the lucky guy that happens to be the beneficiary of being able to announce it. But the team here has been dedicated to that for a while. We had some, as you know, we had some challenges, technology challenges, systematic challenges that kind of pushed us back. And then when you look at things like budget cuts, and then, okay, how do we allocate resources to things like that are, emergency issues versus things that we know that are important, but we just can't dedicate the resources and money towards it. And that kind of caused some delays too with us to be able to get out of it, get the monthly releases out there. But again, at the end of the day, I'm very excited about it. I go in there quite often. And I will tell you this let me just back up and say this about the CDE. We know, again, CDE, customer service, user interface, the CDE is terrible. And I know this, and I love my folks, and the CDE probably hasn't changed in a while. But one of the things that I can tell you and to your listeners that I'm committed to is making sure that we enhance the user interface of the CDE to make sure that it is easier to read, easier to navigate. That's one of the reasons why, I don't know if you noticed, we began putting the trends at the very opening screen, because I wanted that to be apparent. We wanted people to see that immediately as soon as they logged in, and how to navigate to the different places where they wanted to go. Those were just little fixes, but we're doing a complete overhaul of the CDE to make that better and to make it more user friendly, so that, we want, you're a smart guy, you can navigate CDE, but, we want the your average everyday American citizen who says, I want to know more about crime in my area, to be able to go into the CDE and pull up that information and say, oh, I understand now what's going on here. But to answer your question, I think it's so important that we are transparent. And, one of the Director Patel's priorities is fierce organizational accountability. And I think that is the transparency goes along with that. And so I think that's why it's really important for us to get that information out as soon as we can.
And it is, for people that don't use it, it is such a tremendous resource. Again, like you said, it is a challenge to navigate, but once you learn how to navigate it, right now, I think about 20% of our agencies in the real-time crime index, the data is coming straight from your monthly updates. They come every month on the 15th, which is amazing to have that regularity and certainty. And I was at a conference recently. The usual line is about how we get, within the 6 days after a month ends, we get labor data, we get employment data in strong detail. The John Arnold, who runs Arnold Ventures, which funds the real-time crime index, we can tell every day how many slaughtered pigs there were. And so I'm at this conference, and it was during the government shutdown. I was like, well, I can't make my joke about how crime data is worse. They're slower than labor data, because crime data is still going. It's running in the shutdown, and we're not getting employment data. So, it's a fantastic site. So I appreciate it. And having you here, I'll say that it's great work. What are the biggest hurdles that you guys face when you're trying to get monthly data out like that?
Yeah, there's several different hurdles, I think, because one of the things that I think is important is that, and you know this, and I'm sure that your listeners know this as well, is that it's making sure that the public understands what the data says. The annual report that comes out, and this uses different estimation tables, estimation processes for the yearly report than necessarily that doesn't go into the monthly reports, but understanding what is there, right? I mean, we publish the information, and what we hope is, I haven't really taken a look too much recently because I've been given that information a little bit of time to settle what agencies are contributing to the monthly reports right now, because I know it's not all 19,000 law enforcement agencies. So we know that that's the case. So one of the challenges is helping the law enforcement partners understand the importance of sharing that information on a monthly basis. And it goes towards that transparency and how it can really be helpful for law enforcement partners to make sure that they are doing that. And then there's also, like I said before, the systematic challenges and as you know, the crime data goes from law enforcement agencies to the states, and then the states to the FBI. And so then you talk about making sure that you're translating those state-specific type crimes into a uniform way to report it across for the monthly reports. So all of those ways in which we translate the data to make sure that it's displayed appropriately and transparently to the public. Those are the kind of the key challenges I see, is just making sure that we help people understand the importance of it.
Is there one thing or a set of things that you wish users of the CDE or the monthly data knew, and sort of, this is the pitfall you have to worry about whenever you're using this information source?
Yeah, I think it's, again, back to the whole thing about understanding how the information is received and how the estimation works to create the trends. And when you have monthly releases, and let's say you only have, I don't even know the number, but I'm just going to throw out a number, just say, let's say 50% of the law enforcement agencies are contributing to the monthly reports, but we're still trying to generate a national trend, right? And so at the end of the day, you're extrapolating a lot of missing data to come up with those trends. And so I think it's important to understand that they're preliminary, their estimation, because at the end of the day, in 2020, for the 2024 crime data release, reported crime in the nation, we had 94% of the population that was covered. And that is phenomenal. Now, I mean, I would love to get 100% of the population covered by crime data. I don't know that that's really is really feasible, considering some of the agencies just don't have the capability, either resources or IT infrastructure to be able to send their crime data to their state repositories. But I think at the end of the day, 94% is a huge number, and I think we're going to continue to get better and better. But again, with the monthly releases, you're probably extrapolating a lot of data, because not all agencies are contributing. Some agencies may only contribute once a year, some only quarterly. But the idea is to get it out there and to make it public, and maybe, like I said, the law enforcement agencies will look at it and say, hey, my neighboring jurisdiction is providing this information monthly. I should probably do the same thing, so that in a countywide basis or a statewide basis, our legislators, our educators, or whoever can use that data as quickly as possible and try to get it out into the hands of the people that need it.
When you guys released your 2024 data, traditionally it's been sort of a September, October type release. This year, last year, it was in August, early August, and it sort of took people by surprise, or at least the nerdy people that I know that are gung-ho about all of this data. So that was fantastic to get this earlier. What was sort of the rationale that led to 6 or 7 weeks earlier release than traditional? And is it possible to sort of humanly possible to get even earlier releases for the national year-end estimates?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, it goes back to this commitment that I have, that my commitment to you and to all of your listeners is try to get that information as quickly as we can out to the public as fast as, and the other thing, when you back up and you think about data quality, right? I mean, we want to get it out fast, but we don't want to get it out fast to the detriment of the quality of the information that's being pushed out. And of course, it's only as good as what we receive. And so we have the cutoff date of April 1st, which gives the agencies an opportunity to take a look at their data that they're sending to us, make sure that it's good, and then send it by April 1st. And then that gives us time. I think last year we received maybe 710,000 different data points, or maybe even more than that. It was a huge amount of data points that we received, that we were trying to turn into about 800 different tables. And so when you think about, you have, that's kind of our Super Bowl, right? After April 1st is for those, like you mentioned, the data scientist nerds that are sitting they're waiting, right? They're ready to go, because these super smart folks are going to take that information and extrapolate it and put them into the tables to put them on the CDE. But man, they're working nonstop to try to get that information out there. I think it is possible that we may be able to get some preliminary trends out sooner than the early August piece of it. I do think that that's quite possible. We just have to see what the information is. And, the other thing that we talked about earlier was some of the things that we want the public to understand. When you think about that 3-month lag that we have, and there's a reason why there's a 3-month lag there. The people who normally don't work in crime stats don't really understand, but it takes that 3 months in order to let the crime data to settle, because agencies can go in and change it. New dispositions on cases could change the data. And that's one of the things that we try to educate the American people about, is that, hey, law enforcement agencies can go in and change their data at any time. It's always available for change. And so when we talk about the public and how because we're frequently answering questions from, the national media or from the local media about, like, why are your numbers different than this number is? Chicago says this and you say that, right? And we go back and we say, okay, look, well, a couple of things. First is, if you're looking at the Reported Crime in the Nation report, that's a yearly report, and it's a static snapshot in time that they could submit on April 1st, and that's what our cutoff is. But on May the 5th, they could go in and change their homicide numbers in the CDE, and it's not going to be accurately reported in the Reported Crime in the Nation report, because again, that's a static report, a snapshot in time. And there's also definition differences that may be experienced by different states and how they define certain crime, and so there's going to be differences. But that's a long way to get to the point, which is, I think we might be able to get some preliminary trends earlier out to the general public. We're looking at ways in which we can take a look at the data as it comes in on April the 1st, see if we can pull some preliminary trends out there and get them out as soon as maybe April as soon as maybe May or early June, so that trend analysis can be out there. It's going to take us a little bit more time still to do the general tables that we do within the CDE, and probably we're looking at about the same time frame probably for the release of Reported Crime in the Nation. But we're always going to try to get better, faster, but also focusing on that data quality piece.
You mentioned the nerds, so that's a good segue into this question about BJS. How, and I say that very lovingly of your colleagues at the Bureau of Justice Statistics, how do you work between the FBI and BJS, and how do you see UCR and all of that work fitting in with the National Crime Victimization Survey and all of the work that they do?
So let me just say, first of all, I use the term nerds lovingly as well, because I myself consider myself a nerd, that even though I didn't graduate with an engineering degree, I do like to get into the weeds of some of this stuff. I'm not nearly smart. I'm not nearly as smart as you are or your listeners when it comes to statistics, but I do consider myself a statistician nerd as well. But here's what I would say about the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Statistics. We work so closely with them. It's almost like you almost couldn't tell one from the other unless they started talking about the actual reports that they're doing. We have such a close symbiotic relationship, because I do think that while you have the National Crime Victimization Survey and the Reported Crime in the Nation report, they may be different and have different methodologies, but I think they both can tell the same story in the world of crime in the country. You look at the Crime Victimization Survey, and somebody may feel like they're a victim of a crime but never have reported it. And so, but we generally see that the trends tend to track each other. And so I think that there's this really good symbiotic relationship. We take the Reported Crime in the Nation, the NIBRS information, we give it to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. They work with that. And then we're working very closely with them also on special reports, taking a look at the data that we receive and what can we extrapolate from that. Because one of the things that I challenged our folks here to do is, don't just be a collector. Let's be a collector and then do something with this information, something that's useful, something that a normal, everyday, average person could pick it up and say, oh, I understand this. Like, we did a recent report on flash mobs in the United States and the damage that it's done, the loss in the numbers, as far as the millions of dollars of loss to these businesses. And we work very closely with BJS as well, because they have a voice, can help us amplify that as well. And so it's really, like I said, a very, very symbiotic relationship and a very close-knit relationship, because I think the last thing that needs to happen is that we should go on separate directions, because the American people look at this and look and expect us, and I expect us to be working very closely with their BJS partners, because it is a true partnership, and because both of the things that we do serve the American people and serve a purpose and can work together to paint a true picture in the U.S.
You mentioned that flash mob report. I just want to shout that out as a fantastic report. I mean, it's obviously it's flash mobs, but it's great because, one, it was turned around very quickly. Two, you give the definition, and you're saying, with NIBRS data, this is how within the NIBRS data a flash mob is defined, so that if I want to go out and do that on any other city or a state or something like that, I could do that. And then put out that analysis using this like incredibly rich data source that's coming out. So I will reiterate that that's on the CDE, right? That user can go and look in the report section and download that. So I think that's a great example. It's such a great example of what NIBRS can do, which is a good segue to my question about where do you think we are with the NIBRS transition? Where along sort of that process are we?
So I think we are well on our way to, as you know, the UCR program collects both summary reporting numbers, summary reporting statistics, as well as NIBRS. And, NIBRS came around in the 1980s, and we're still trying to transition to that. We've had some issues in the past, and really it's more about wanting to make sure that we provide the most complete picture of crime data that we can. But I do think that we were at, I want to say, around 83% NIBRS usage last year, and I can double check those numbers, but I think we're pretty close to that. And so we're very close to the point where we're going to be able to say we'll still display summary reporting system information on the CDE so that it's there. But when it comes to estimation and creating a crime in the nation report, we're going to just use NIBRS. I'm not sure that we're going to do that for the 2025 report, but we may be close to doing it for the 2026 report once it's all said and done. There are some, like we mentioned earlier, there's definitely some hindrances on trying to get everybody transitioned to NIBRS, but most of the population cities now are contributing via NIBRS. And so we're well on our way to being able to move away from the system that was created in 1920, and let's jump into the 1980s, and get our big hair and our stonewashed jean jackets on, and let's jump down the river flow, right?
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, I got my leg warmers, man. I'm ready to go. So at the end of the day, we're very close to that, and I'm very excited about where we're going. And we're constantly educating and working with our local law enforcement partners to tell them, to show them what you mentioned, the richness in the NIBRS data, and it's just so rich. And we're constantly looking at ways we can make it better. As an example, one of the things that we, the CJIS division operates in a shared management philosophy, and we work with our advisory policy board, which is made up of state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies. And when we make changes to the NIBRS forms or significant changes to the criminal history record information, we work through that board and we make recommendations to the board, and then they'll make the determination of whether or not those the recommendations will be accepted. But like as an example, when we talk about NIBRS, one of the things that would be interesting to know, I think, was a firearm discharged during the commission of a crime? And then what happened to the person? If was a person shot, is a person deceased? Well, it would probably be a murder. So you would probably know that if it was a murder, but was it discharged? Did it hit somebody? Did it not hit somebody? But all those things, I think, for a law enforcement officer, I think those things would be interesting to know. And then if you're talking about legislation, I mean, that would be good information to know. So there's so much rich data. And I think that's the thing, is that when you see what's in it for me, and I say me as if I'm a police chief or I'm sheriff, what's in it for me is there's so much good information in there that can tell me where do I need to send my patrols and work on my patrols? How do I need to go and approach my legislation to legislators to get more money to target specific types of crime problems? That data is so rich, and it can provide you those data-driven decisions and talking points. So I'm excited to see where we're going. And like I said, we continue to educate our partners in law enforcement, but we're very close to being able to kind of let SRS kind of fade into the sunset. I don't know that it'll be, because one of the issues that we have right now is how do we continue that trend, right? The trend analysis of 10 years, we got to make sure that we're able to translate what we were doing prior to, and then into the future. We got to make sure we're able to continue to make that trend available. And so there are a lot of really smart people that are working on that right now to make sure that we don't lose anything with the transparency and with the data. But I think we're very close in moving that direction.
Yeah, that's my only concern really of moving away from SRS is that that's sort of how traditionally the public has interacted with it. And when you think about the violent crime trend, it's not all of the NIBRS categories. It's, that sort of go up and then stay there and then go down of the SRS.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the key we got to make sure that we don't lose anything in that. We want to make sure we're stepping into the future and going forward, but it may require us to do like 2 different tables that follow simultaneously side by side so that the American public can see it and see that they do the exact same thing as far as trends are concerned. But whatever we do, at the end of the day, we got to make sure that we do it with the thought of being transparent and the thought that if people are looking at it from in the history, that they're able to use that data to extrapolate what they need for whatever purpose.
Can you talk through the decision and the implementation of shooting data within NIBRS, how gunshot victimization data?
I'm not sure. Can you repeat that? I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Where the change, there was a change where it basically allows agencies to say that a non-murder victim received a gunshot wound.
That was an example of something that I was mentioning before of how we can make changes to NIBRS. But how that process works is when we get requests from law enforcement agencies all the time to make changes to NIBRS. And so what we have to do is we've got to be very deliberate in how that works, because the changes that we make affect 19,000 law enforcement agencies, and then require not only that then also require some kind of a systems change, an IT change. So all those changes, we have to be very deliberate on the ones that we can make. And so then what we'll try to do is work with the advisory policy board and say, okay, are there multiple systematic changes that we want to make? Let's make all those recommendations at once. So if the agency is going to make those changes to submit different types of data via NIBRS, that they can make those changes all at once, and then it can move through. Right now, we're in a moratorium to where we're not going to change NIBRS for at least the next 3 or 4 years, because again, we there's just too many changes, and it was just affecting our law enforcement agencies in a negative way, and asking them to do too many things and make too many changes and use too many resources and spend too much money to make these changes. And so what we did was we kind of said, hey, we know what changes we wanted to make that we've made in the past few years to make NIBRS more rich. Let's let the agencies catch up. Let's let them do what they need to do there. And then we'll talk in the future for any changes to NIBRS in the future.
So if you had a magic wand, this is now we're getting into the sillier part of the conversation. If you had a magic wand, what's one misconception about crime or the FBI that you wish you could just sort of get rid of overnight?
That's a great question. I think the biggest misconception is that we deliberately change numbers to fit a political narrative. I think that's the thing that I would like to get rid of. As you're aware, the 2021, 22 numbers, we had a big issue with that because we were going to go just NIBRS only collection, and we only had 62%, I think, of the population coverage. And so without SRS, we had this huge gap there. And so in order to be able to create the appropriate crime trend tables that we wanted to create, we had to go out and go to these large agencies that were not, at the time, were not submitting NIBRS. And we had to go out and source those. We had basically go to their websites and say, okay, what are your numbers? What are your numbers? And kind of supplement those. And so when somebody looks at the crime data, they would say, oh, wait a minute, you said crime went down, but it actually went up because we see the new numbers. And I'm like, no, that wasn't really the new numbers. That was missing some information. And so as a result of that, I got a you are cordially invited to come testify in front of Congress request. And so I was happy to do it because I knew we had a good story to tell. And I think that the narrative was out there that we basically changed numbers to fit a political agenda. And I can tell you unequivocally, that is not the case. I would never, ever change anything numbers wise to meet a political agenda, because that's just not who I am. I've been an FBI agent for 24 years. I believe in transparency. I believe in truth. I believe in doing things the right way, even when people aren't watching. And we would never, ever change those numbers. I mean, the numbers are what they are. And do I think it fully captures all of crime in the nation? Probably not. And if you look at things like, one of the questions that I was asked was about destination locations and crime. For instance, if you look at Panama City Beach and you think about the summertime, crime rates going to skyrocket in Panama City Beach in the summer. but then it goes back down in the winter. So is that really an accurate depiction of crime in Panama City Beach when it's a destination location? I mean, you could argue, yes, it is, because people are still coming there and will continue to come there. But at the end of the day, I want to make sure that we're being as transparent as we can and getting this information. So I think that's the biggest misconception that I would want people to know is we will never, ever change numbers to fit an agenda. We are always going to report to the best of our ability what we receive. We're going to take that information and we're going to publish it in a manner that we think basically we're going to try to make sure the data quality is verified and valid. And then we're going to push that information out and not shy away from hard questions based on that information.
Do you have any strategies or tactics that you prefer in order to sort of, when addressing those issues, or people coming to you either in good faith not believing it or bad faith not believing it? How you want to approach people that don't necessarily believe the numbers?
Yeah, I think the best thing that we can do and that we have been doing is publishing our methodology. And you publish the methodology, and then you also have the raw data that's there. So if you're a smart guy like you are, or some other statistician can look at the methodology and look at the raw data and marry those two up, and they can say, yep, okay, I got it, right? But it's also just about educating people. So we're using, social media to push this information out. We're having to educate the director and the deputy directors here to make sure that their messaging is the same when it goes out, to make sure that they understand what it is that we're doing here. And then also answering the questions, because we'll get a significant influx, obviously, of questions from local and state and federal national news media outlets. And so one of the things that I do is work with a great public affairs team here, and we work to make sure that we're providing a comprehensive answer to every one of those questions so that that information is easily understandable. Because you know this as well as I do when it comes to crime data. I ask a question to my folks, and the response I get is filled with about 1,000 caveats. And I'm like, now, okay, let's break this down so that the normal person understands the answer to the question. And so that's important too. So one of the strategies that we employ here is providing a comprehensive answer, but providing an answer in which the layperson would understand it, because I think that's really important. And, you're always going to have some of your naysayers, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, as long as we can continue to educate folks, and, we bring our law enforcement partners back here too, so that they can carry the torch with them when they go back out to their jurisdictions. We've had law enforcement agencies come in. We'll come in for a day and we'll talk about crime reporting, what we're doing, how we use it, the methodologies we use in order to push out the crime trends. So we'll do all that as well to kind of help, have them be a mouthpiece for CJIS as well. So there are a number of different outreach strategies that we use to make sure that people understand what we do with the information.
That's great. And yeah, I wish I had a better answer as well. Whenever I'm I think the one thing that I rely on is the fact that your data matches CDC data and the gun violence archive data, and you can go to individual agencies and see the same thing. And so I don't know what else to do. It's a really challenging issue to deal with.
Yeah. Now, and I'll say this too, if you don't mind, Jeff, like they're at the end of the day, have we gotten things wrong in the past? Probably. And really, we've had people that like you or other folks that are good at this in this world that will reach out to us and say, hey, I think you got this wrong. And here's what we see. Here's what I'm seeing. And we always take that information back and we look at it. And sometimes we've said, yeah, that's right. We need to fix that. And we've made those changes. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges, but also one of the things I'm very proud of is that we have a team here that is dedicated to making sure that the quality of the data is good. And if we make mistakes, we're quick to fix them. But I think, these guys are working, it seems like 24/7, especially when it comes to our Super Bowl, which is April 1st and beyond, to get the report of crime of the nation report done. They work constantly and they work consistently always with the end user in mind.
That's great. All right. So now the toughest, most difficult question. Do you have a favorite FBI movie or TV show, or do you just not want to do any of that?
I don't watch a lot of FBI shows, but I will tell you that I got hooked on Criminal Minds. I used to watch that show constantly. And again, it went back to my background of wanting to be a profiler, but I used to love that show. And I mean, even though some of the plots seem to be the same for every show, I seem to I always get stuck on watching that show. It seems like every time I come across it on TV, I'll probably stop and watch an episode or two just because I really enjoy it. And I think that's very much one of the interesting parts of what it is that we do in the FBI is, it's an art really, and they call it behavioral science, but really it's an art more than it is a science. But that's my favorite. That's probably my favorite FBI show.
All right, good answer. So what's next for CJIS?
So we're constantly looking at ways to get better. And one of the things that I challenged my team to do last year was to create a long-term strategy. We call it our CJIS 2030 strategy. And it's the CJIS 2030 strategy involves 3 different buckets, which one is empowering our leaders. The second bucket is organizing around value. So organizing around value means we've adopted the scaled agile framework. And I'm not an expert in SAFe, but when it comes to business agility, what I saw the advantages across the division was creating teams of people that were working on problems, and they weren't waiting on direction. They weren't waiting on approvals. They were making improvements to things, long before they ever got to my level. They were making improvements and advancements. And that's how innovation starts. And that's how we're going to get better, is creating these teams of people using the scaled agile framework. It makes us much more agile. What it also did was it put the business folks and the IT folks sitting together every quarter planning on improvements. When we talk about the improvements to the Crime Data Explorer, we have a team of people that's their role, that the product owner for CDE, that person, that their sole purpose is to lead that team to make CDE better, stronger, faster, and more efficient. And so they know what the vision of my vision is, and the vision of the organization. And that's what they're working towards. And the other one is innovating. The other bucket is innovating to lead in information sharing. And we take all of these things that we're doing and creating teams of teams and becoming stronger, faster, more efficient. And the demand signal for information is great, and it's immediate, right? I personally get annoyed whenever I log onto my computer and it takes more than 2 seconds for my computer to start up. So I know that the demand signal for information is out there, but we have to figure out a way in which we can take all these buckets of information. It's not feasible for us to be a repository for billions of records. So you have to create what my people are telling me, because I'm not a technician or I'm not an IT guy, but a data mesh to be able to let the information live where it needs to live, where we can then just pull it in and then send it out to the folks who need it, when they need it, how they need it, and where they need it. And so those are the things that we're looking at in the future for the next 4 years. Is everything we're doing is leading up to those things. And again, I think I really have seen vast improvements in the workforce when it comes to becoming more efficient. And again, it empowers our people to make decisions. It takes the decision making and pushes it down to the knowledge workers so that they can do what they need to do to make us better, stronger, faster, and more efficient. And I'm seeing that already, and I know we're going to see it in leaps and bounds again in the next year or two.
That's awesome. And we absolutely see it on the user end at the very end of the spectrum. So thank you for all your hard work, and give my thanks to your team. They're doing great stuff. So Assistant Director Ferguson,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Jeff-alytics podcast. Be sure to subscribe, and to learn more, head on over to ahdatalytics.com for more information and previous episodes. If you like what you heard, please leave a glowing review, which will help others to discover the show. Until next time, I'm Jeff Asher.